And speaking of leading in love, I am truly excited to welcome our special guest speaker this morning, Tim McManus. Tim has been an organizer with the Industrial Areas Foundation, also known as IAF, since 2009. With the IAF, Tim has worked with IAF projects in Texas, Arizona, and California. And just listen to some of the things that he has accomplished in those places during this time. He's currently supervising organizing work in the Monterey Bay region in Phoenix, and here in a newly developing IAF project in the Central Valley. Here he is doing organizing work that involves training and developing congregational and institutional leaders, teaching them how to work together in their region to affect the common good. And again, this is some of just what Tim has accomplished. His organizing and leadership work has led to Medicaid expansion in Arizona, increased funding for after-school programs, parks, and libraries in several cities, protections from immigration raids by law enforcement, local strategies for dealing with mass incarceration, and the creation of county health programs for undocumented immigrants. Tim was recently part of a small delegation of organizers, priests, and lay leaders who met with Pope Francis in the Vatican to discuss this important justice work. Tim has a BA in theology from Boston College, a place I know well, and a Master of Education from Notre Dame. He lives in Gilroy with his wife, Marie, a bilingual speech therapist for students with mental and behavioral disabilities, and their 3 young children. Please welcome a true friend of this congregation, Tim McManus.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to all of you for welcoming me today. I have some remarks prepared or some things I wanted to talk about, but honestly, I could have just sat through your worship and been inspired by the stories that I've heard and the questions you've posed to each other and the things you're reflecting on, and found the words to respond to that during our time today. It's been a beautiful service so far, and I'm really grateful to be a part of it. So I began my time as an organizer with the IF in Dallas, Texas, as Tim mentioned. I was teaching high school there, and I was living in and teaching in and going to church in a neighborhood that had been neglected for decades in the city of Dallas. And everything kind of came to a head when there was a car fire outside of our church, and it took 20 minutes for the police to respond, and the person passed away in their car because of that failed response time. So our church called a meeting. I was at church one Sunday, and in our bulletin it said, come on out on Tuesday night to a meeting to talk about safety in our neighborhood. And so I showed up at this meeting, not knowing what to expect, but what I witnessed, I walked into this meeting, and yes, the city councilwoman and the police chief and representatives from the city were there, but they weren't the ones running the meeting. Instead, the people running the meeting were these women from my church, these grandmothers, these singers from the choir, these ushers. They were the ones running the meeting. They had the agenda, and they looked across the table to the city officials, and they told these powerful stories of what had been going on in our neighborhood, stories about drug houses and stray dogs that would just wander the neighborhood and terrorize people, and they told the story about the car fire and alleyways that hadn't been cleared in years. And then they made proposals and said, here's what we'd like you to do. In 2 weeks, we want that drug house shut down, and we want the alleyways cleared. And we want a commitment from the police chief to meet with us and to develop a new style, a new approach to policing in the city of Dallas. And to my amazement, I watched one by one as each of the city officials said yes to what was asked of them. And then within a few weeks, we had all those things they asked for. And we started to see real change in our neighborhood as a result of that meeting. I was blown away by that. And, for years, I've been trying to figure out how you make change, how you make real sustainable change, and how you do so in a way that respects local communities, that puts people affected by issues right at the center of creating change. And here was my first opportunity to witness that. So after experiencing that, I started to get involved with IF organizing in Dallas, and as Tim read out, I left after many years of teaching, I left teaching to go into organizing there in Dallas, and then in Arizona, and about 10 years ago came out to California. And then a couple of years ago, now I've been coming out to the Central Valley to work with leaders like you, clergy, and other religious leaders here to build a new chapter of the IF in the Central Valley. One thing I've learned about this model of organizing, one thing I've learned about what this is, what the IF is it's a tradition. It's a tradition of trying to achieve change in the community. Each of our organizations are local, they're independent, they have their own agendas, they identify what's going on locally, they're led by local people, but they're part of a long tradition of trying to create change, of trying to achieve justice in communities, inspired by people, pastors, ministers, organizers, lay leaders, that for decades have been striving for that. One of those people who has really shaped how we understand organizing and how we understand justice and change, and it has had a big impact on my life, is the great civil rights organizer and sometimes overlooked leader in the civil rights movement, Ella Baker. Ella Baker was one of the true heroes, not just of the civil rights movement, but really of American democracy and American society. And I want to spend our time this morning just reflecting on some of what she understood so well and taught and instilled in the movement that we hope to carry on today and that we should strive for and continue to follow today. If you're not familiar with Ella Baker, she started her professional career in organizing with the NAACP before later joining the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and starting SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. When she started with the NAACP, she had this insight and this understanding that the movement was going to advance by real training and leadership development of people. That's what really gave birth to what we understand and we know from the sit-ins and a lot of civil rights organizing, was this real investment in people. It's real investment in people. And so she got approved, and she got the NAACP to approve a training strategy where she went around the country week after week after week training people. And the title for her training, the title for the training that she did was "Give Light and the People Will Find a Way." Give light and the people will find a way. She had this deep belief that people, ordinary people in our communities, can do this, can change things. They don't need some superstar. They don't need some charismatic leader, counter to the memory of the civil rights movement, that this idea that charismatic leaders are what's needed to make change. No, she didn't see that. She thought real ordinary people, they can learn this, they care about it, and they can do it, and they can achieve change. One of the people who went through one of these trainings with Ella Baker was Rosa Parks. And there were many other people like Rosa Parks who went through, received this training, were invested in and developed and trained, and then at the local level made things happen. So the first insight that's critical to what Ella Baker and others understood, and we try to pass along, is this real investment. You want to achieve justice, invest in the development of people. Invest in leadership development at the local level. And good people will know what to do. This is the story of the women in my church leading the way for us in South Dallas, making change. But that's the story of how justice gets achieved. The second insight that I want to draw from that is connected to the first, is that people will then further their leadership by real true participation in the decision-making of an organization, in their own investment in the organization. So she would try to build these structures where people had to interact with each other, and they had to learn how to make decisions together, and to create kind of this democratic culture within organizations so that people had to learn how to negotiate and work together and figure things out and make decisions. She was really, really against the idea of a large kind of top-down national structure. And it's actually why she parted ways eventually with the NAACP, was she was frustrated by the idea of a large kind of national organization. She wanted these local entities where people could really deliberate with each other and learn how to be leaders and learn how to organize together. Third insight from her work, recruitment. All she did when she would get into a local community is recruit. and work and go door to door or church to church or organization to organization and look for people and talk to them and engage with them. This is where the title for today's lesson, today's sermon, comes from. Ella Baker referred to this as spade work. Anybody ever landscaped? Anybody garden here? All right, what's spade work like? It's hard. It is hard. I spent my summers landscaping growing up, and yeah, you get a shovel and you just dig, and you just keep digging, and you think you've dug deep enough, and you haven't. You got to go further, and then you hit a root, or then you hit a rock, or the person wants a tree put in a place with really, really hard soil, and you got to just keep digging and digging. But that's what she understood the work of achieving justice to be, is spade work. To go door to door and just talk to people and get rejected and try again, and to pull together. She would have all these memos she'd send out to her supervisors, and they would say things like, I'm off now to another one of those meetings in a church basement where we're going to work on some things, or we're going to make some phone calls, and we're going to do something. It's all part of that spade work, all part of that spade work. So she would go into the community. She knew she was building something, but she knew that's what it was going to take. That's what it was going to take to achieve justice. It was not going to be quick. It was not going to be easy. You were going to have to do the hard thing. You were going to have to pick up the phone and just keep calling people, or going door to door, or having a whole bunch of conversations. And when she would evaluate, when she was supervising and she would evaluate local projects, the ones that were the healthiest were the ones where the local leaders, the local organizers were willing to do that spade work, that slow, patient work of building something before you can try to achieve change. Where it would really fizzle out was when people wanted something quick and they jumped into issues right away, and they just thought, well, we know what's wrong, let's go fix it, and they wouldn't engage in that slow, patient spade work that's required of justice. When I was organizing in Phoenix, I was assigned to a large immigrant neighborhood in the eastern part of Phoenix, to a local elementary school and a Catholic church. And I started organizing small group meetings, what we call house meetings, and one-on-one conversations. And over again, I heard these horrific stories about safety from all these immigrant leaders. Now, I moved to Phoenix a few months after, if you remember, when SB 1070 was signed into law. This is the big anti-immigrant legislation in Arizona that just instilled a deep, deep fear in the immigrant community, and that was its intent. And the biggest impact I learned locally when I would talk to undocumented immigrants in the community was what it did to their neighborhoods and neighborhood safety. Because overnight, hundreds of families left right away when that law got signed. They left, went to other states, went back to Mexico in some cases, and it left all these abandoned properties and vacant homes and apartments, and organized crime moved in and preyed on these people. Just prey on them. See, the stories about broad daylight breaking into somebody's home and threatening them and saying, go ahead, call the police and I'll call ICE, I'll call immigration. Or people dealing drugs in the park right in front of their kids, kids just terrified to walk home from school. So all these stories about safety. And their biggest fear, obviously, was for their children. And I asked them, your children, they're alone after school, huh? And they said, yeah, we work late, our kids get out of school, and then they've got to walk home from school by themselves, and they sit there, and they're terrified, sitting there all by themselves in the house or the apartment. And then they told me it wasn't always like that. There used to be an after-school program here. So what do you mean? So, oh, yeah, we used to have an after-school program. They would get picked up at the school, they would go to the after-school program, they'd get dropped off right before we got home for work. It was perfect. And they didn't know what happened. So these leaders, they organized a meeting with the city of Phoenix, and they found out that during the Great Recession, 2008-2009 recession, the city budget took an impact, and the first thing to go were those after-school programs. It just got slashed. They used to have 83 after-school programs in the city of Phoenix, and overnight it went down to 25. And guess where those 25 programs were? They were in nice neighborhoods, wealthy neighborhoods, a place that had a lot of voters and campaign contributors. And they slashed them in all the poor parts of Phoenix, all the communities of color in Phoenix. So we knew we had a situation here. We also found out it wasn't just after-school programs. They had cut library hours. They closed swimming pools. Imagine closing swimming pools in Phoenix in the summertime. But they also knew they didn't have enough power by themselves to change it, because they met with their local city councilman, and he was angry about it because he lost all the programs in his neighborhood. So they reached out to other parishes and other schools in other parts of Phoenix and other city council districts, and they asked them, have you experienced this? And they heard more stories about this reduction in services. So they organized a strategy, working with congregations, parishes all across the city in every single city council district, to organize around the city budget hearings and to show up every single time in different places in your own district and tell stories of those impacts. And then they'd go back into the parishes and the congregations and organize workshops and teach people, here's how the city budget works. Here's who our council member is. Here's when the next workshop is. Here's what you can do. And they did this for months. For months they did this work. And they finally had a meeting with the city manager, and the city manager presented to them a draft budget where he was going to increase current after-school programs by 60%, get them back up to 40, down from 83 to 25, but back up to 40 in still a tough budget year. He said, well, this is not everything, but this is a win. This is change. This is what change looks like. So they all showed up at the final city council vote when that budget was presented. They watched as one by one, all the council members voted yes for this new budget that would restore these programs despite many other cuts they were still making. And finally it was adopted, and they cheered, and they went out to the parking lot, and these leaders, these undocumented immigrant leaders who had started out in fear and had now watched as they'd organized this slow, patient process to get a win. And their city councilman came running at them, came running out of the council chambers. We were in the parking lot just evaluating, talking. He came running over to the group. I thought, oh no, did something go wrong, or what happened? And he ran up, and he was almost in tears. And he turned to one of the women in the group, this woman, Martha Espinosa. He said, Martha, I've never seen anything like that with this city council in a tough budget year like this. I want you to know this only happened because of you. This only happened because of you and what you did. He said, I'm going to make sure the first program that gets reopened is in your neighborhood, and your kids are in it. That kind of change was possible because those women, those leaders, they were willing to do that Spade work. They were willing to do the slow, patient work of building towards achieving change, and because they had the capacity to do it all along. I mean, their leadership, their talent, their effort, their energy, and their passion for it because of how it was affecting their families and their children, that's out there in our community too. We just have to invest in it. We just have to pay attention to it, and it's there and can achieve great things. Ella Baker had a real bias towards local work. She would have their chapters of Southern Christian Leadership Conference, of SNCC, the NAACP, focus locally. She thought local issues are a reflection of big national struggles. They play out locally, and pay attention locally. And finally, she believed in being relational. There's another great leader in the civil rights movement, a man who I got to know kind of later in his life named Bob Moses. He's a great organizer in Mississippi. He went to go work for Ella Baker at the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And what he said is he had the choice of going to work with Dr. King, with SCLC, or going to work with Ella Baker. And he chose Ella Baker. And he said, because I could just tell she cared about me. She just cared. She took an interest in me. And I wanted to work with somebody like that. And so Ella Baker was relational. She paid attention to people. And it's that kind of relationality which we believe in that gives us the power to do these things. There's a great Unitarian philosopher named Bernard Loomer who teaches about relational power, the type of power that's different from unilateral top-down power, but it's relational, that's shared, that's possible when people come together around a common agenda, and it grows, it's expansive the more diverse the group of people that are coming together becomes. I was in the community of Allensworth earlier this week. I don't know if you've been reading about or hearing about what's gone on in Allensworth, a historical African-American farming community in Tulare County. And their leaders there, they're interested in the IAF and being part of our organization as they've recently been getting flooded out of Allensworth. In fact, having people cut the levee near Allensworth in a way that made the water flow towards their community. And I was meeting with them the other day in their community center down there, and just in this room with incredible leaders, incredible talent, incredible imagination and potential, these incredible leaders. And what they said to me, they said, look, we don't need help on resources. We don't need help on policy. We got that. We've got to figure. They have a community plan. They're getting money from the state. I mean, they got things figured out. What they said is we need help with relationships. We're isolated. We know each other. We don't have relationships in Fresno. We don't have relationships on the other side of our county. And in fact, we don't even have some of the relationships in our own community as the community has changed. The community is now about 90% Latino, and these African American leaders are having a tough time connecting to their local community. So that's what we want to figure out. How do we deepen relationships? And so they get it. They understand what this work is about and how we're going to create long-term sustainable change. There's a lot we have to do here. There's a lot. There's a lot here in this valley. I mean, at this very moment, right now, there are people in this community who would be conspiring against the values that you're professing here. In this very, right now, people are thinking about how do they work, how will they organize themselves, how will they achieve power to fight against some of the values you've lifted up this morning. In fact, probably not too far from this campus, right? They're thinking about things like that. So if we're going to do anything about that, if we're going to achieve that just, equitable valley, Fresno community, we have to be in it for building long-term, sustainable relational power. We have to be willing to do, as Ella Baker points out, that spade work, that slow, patient, day in, day out work of building something together so that we can take on some of what we need to change here in this valley. I'm very appreciative of this church, your leadership, and those of you that have been involved and connected with us. It's been so great to have UU Fresno as part of the IF organization. You bring so much to us. There's a lot more that we need to do, but we have to have congregations, institutions like this, that just as there are those out there that are conspiring to suppress these values, we have to be conspiring together and thinking together and building power together in a way that we can achieve the type of community, the type of Fresno that we want to see. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you this morning. And again, thank you for being part of what we are too. Thank you.